Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. I asked ChatGPT what vendor onboarding professionals like you have been searching for in the past week. And one of the blaring results was how to onboard vendors faster. Well, I have 5 tips to speed up the vendor process. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 356, 5 ways to speed up the vendor onboarding and change process. Now, like I said in the intro, I asked ChatGPT, what are vendor professionals like you searching for in the past week? And actually, it came up with a lot of stuff. But one of the blaring things that I found is that it asked for or it listed shortening the onboarding cycle, stating that many are dissatisfied with how long it takes, from weeks to even months in some cases. And so when I read that, initially I was, well, you know what? It takes how long it takes. We need to avoid fraud. We need to make sure that vendor data that we enter is compliant so that we're not penalized either for, paying a vendor that's on a watch list or, collecting bad information so that, if it's filed, if they're a reportable vendor and they're filed with the IRS, now, the company can be susceptible to interest and penalties. But then I thought about it, and when it indicated that it was even months in some cases, and I thought about 5 different ways that can shorten or reduce the vendor onboarding and change cycle just by the documents that you collect and the source of validations that you use. So those are things that we can control. You can't stop doing the validations. You can't stop the forms that you collect. You can't stop that, but you can put some things in place so that it may not take as long. Now, you still can't control the vendor completing the form and sending it back to you, but you can make it as easy as possible. And so, and when I say easy, I mean not doing things like not collecting forms, not doing validations. I mean, make the required steps easier to do. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I do have 5, and for each of these, I have resources that you can either download at a cost or download for free, and I will put all of those in the show notes. All right, so let's start with the first one. So create substitute IRS forms. Now, we all know that trying to collect that W 9 from some vendors is a little bit difficult, especially those vendors that are in the first tax class, that individual sole proprietor, because they may not know how to fill out the W 9. Now, it could also get very confusing and take a longer time for vendors to non-US vendors, foreign payees, to complete the series, whichever series of W-8 forms is applicable to them. First of all, they may not even know which one is uh, required for them or which one they need to fill out. Second of all, they may not know how to fill it out because, maybe they never even heard of the IRS. So the IRS does make it easier for you to collect this information from your vendor just because they do allow substitute IRS forms. Now, what I really like about them is you can combine your vendor setup form and the, IRS, for example, W-9 form. So now you're not collecting two forms from the vendor, you're only collecting one. And if you're only collecting the IRS form W-9 right now, when you create a substitute W-9 form, now you're going to get more information. Because if you think about it, on the IRS W-9, all you get is their legal name, their DBA, which is most likely what their invoices are going to come in, their one address, and their tax ID. That's it. And so, using a vendor setup form, for those of you that are collecting the two forms right now, the IRS W 9 and vendor setup form, you're getting more information because you can include more information. You can include an additional address because maybe the address on the W 9 is their tax address and it's not their physical address, because you always want to make sure you're getting a physical address, and you can require that on a vendor setup form. Also, you can collect additional data such as their DUNS number, or how about their minority classifications, or additional, boxes to check to identify what type of payments will be made, because as we know, even corporations are reportable when they make payments to attorneys, or medical or healthcare payments. Not referring to premiums, but other kind of health and medical services. And so you can have them select that because, when you're onboarding your vendor, you're going to mark that vendor in your vendor master file on the vendor record, right, as reportable or not based on the tax classification. But if you have more information, like the type of payment they're going to be making, maybe you will make a different selection if they're a corporation. And so you can collect more information, and you can collect what I like to call authenticating data. And so I always request on the vendor setup form, or the substitute W-9 form, I like to call it because I combine them, the internal employee that the vendor will do or is doing business with, because that is a deterrence for fraud. Yes, they can go to LinkedIn and get any, employee from your company that they want, but they have no idea if you're going to contact them. And so, more than likely, what we hope will happen is they will abandon the request and go on to the next potential victim that is not asking that for that type of data. And it's a deterrence anyway if you are requiring them to complete your own form versus just letting them submit to you like a fake W-9. So, and that goes for W-8s as well. So, having your own substitute IRS forms helps you. It also helps the vendors, because you can make that language a little more user friendly. So instead of saying disregarded entity, which especially again, those folks in the first tax class of sole proprietorship and individual on the W-9, they don't necessarily know what that means. So you can say what name will your invoices come in? That's how you can uh, uh, name that field or add directions to that field. Plus, when you get that information back, now your internal team members that are, creating that vendor or updating that vendor don't have to guess at what that information is because they know what their forms mean. They don't have to guess whatever information the vendor decided to put in the other tax classification on the W-9 because they didn't know how to fill it out correctly. And so that is a great thing that it is easier for the vendor to fill out, easier for your internal team members that are on the vendor team that are entering this information, easier for them to understand what the vendor selected and indicated because it's your form. Not to mention, now you have the ability to change the language on the forms as well. So if you've got non-U.S. vendors that need to complete a W-8, you can create substitute forms for the W-8, include your information on it as you need it, and then put it in a different language so that the non-US vendors or foreign payees can understand it better. So I hope this gave you some food for thought. And if you want to take a look at substitute W-9 forms, substitute W-8 forms, I have some templates. Now, on the W-8 forms, the templates that I have is for the W-8 bin / the W-8 binee. So I have that one template. And I did that because number one, bringing in the other W-8 series of forms complicated the form too much. And in accounts payable, 90% or probably more of the W-8s that we collect are one of those two anyway. So I'm going to put those into the links to those forms in the show notes. It will be under the Vendor Process Training Center because that's where I have them. All right, so that's one way. That was a long one. Create your own forms. Make it easier for the vendors to fill out and then also easier for your team members that are, on the vendor team, adding and updating these vendors to know what to put where and be able to interpret the forms better because it is your forms. All right, so that was number one. That was a big one. The second one is again along the line of your own forms. Create a company branded ACH form or ACH wire form, whatever you want to call it. What is meant by that? Collect a form or create a company branded form to collect vendor banking details. It not only helps to avoid fraud because now you can ask for authenticating data, like, if they're changing banking, what is their existing banking? Have them include those fields on the form as well. So when you get it back, you can confirm that you have gotten it from your correct vendor. And it also serves as a deterrent because if a fraudster, doesn't have that information, then they're going to go on, abandon that request, and go on to the next potential victim that's not asking for that information. I also recommend you include the internal team member that the vendor does business with, just like you do. I recommend that you do on the substitute W-9 or W-8 forms. Again, yes, they can go to LinkedIn, but they have no idea if you're actually going to contact that internal team member. So it does act as a deterrent. And also, what you can include on this form is you can include some additional authenticating data so that when you go to update it in your accounting system or ERP, you know you're updating the right vendor. So ask for the tax ID. If you have a system, let's say like PeopleSoft, whose bank account information is based on the location and the location is tied to an address, identify or include the link or the fields for the address that it's tied to. So on the vendor banking form, make sure that you have the tax ID and the address. So now you can tie the bank account information to the right address in PeopleSoft. Now may be some other um, uh, things in your accounting system or ERP that might help you to include that information on the banking form, and definitely do that. And actually, on the vendor setup form or the substitute W-8 or W-9 forms as well. So, having your own forms means that you get to customize it based on your accounting systems or ERP. So again, with number one and number two, right, substitute IRS forms, company branded ACH forms, it really helps to make sure that you are collecting the right information, that the vendor understands what information you want and can more easily enter it right on your forms. And you have the ability to avoid fraud in the process. But really, all of that means is that you have less back and forth with the vendor, which shaves off time from your vendor onboarding process or from your vendor update process. And we all know how long it can take going back and back and forth with vendors when they don't always respond to us in a timely manner. All right. So I do have a template for a company branded ACH form. So again, I will put a link to that in the show notes. Now, the third one, hopefully you have something like this already, but I still run into a lot of teams when I go to conferences or when they submit questions that are still going to like multiple places for validation. So the third one is to consolidate your validation. So instead of going to irs.gov e-services to perform the 10 match, yes, I know it's free. Then go to OFAC to search to see if the vendor is on a watch list. Yes, I know that's free. Then go to USPS right there, lookup tool to standardize the address. Yes, I know that's free. Plus, you may not know this, if your vendor is a tax exempt vendor or a nonprofit or charity, you can go, there's a separate tool. You can go to the IRS tool. It's called the tax exempt organization search tool. I do recommend you do that for all vendors that are tax exempt, including like charities, to verify, for example, that they are a legitimate charity, because there are so many fraudsters that are masquerading as charities because they know that people like to give, especially after some type of a uh, uh, natural disaster. Fraudulent charities pop up all the time. And we are coming up to Giving Tuesday, which is the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. I think it's December 2nd this year, but that's when charities or people give to charities, but also uh, organizations or companies may match their employees' donations. And so lots of fraudulent charities pop up. So that's another place you definitely need to check for nonprofit or tax exempt organizations. But if you had one platform that did it all, right, with one search, yes, it may cost, but it may not be prohibitive if you look at the ROI, the return on investment, by calculating how much it costs for everyone to go, right? Each of your team members to go to each one of those sites and perform those searches. If you base that on their time, it may not cost as much. Plus, some of those uh, vendors or platforms that you might look at that will perform right all of the validations at once. They may even have like a bulk upload so that, when it comes time to doing your vendor master file cleanup, you might be able to take advantage of that so you don't have to do a one by one, especially on those. Watch lists, because those are not a one and done. Those are things that you need to do at least on a monthly basis if you do not have a way to continuously monitor, which, by the way, some platforms have a way to continuously monitor your sanctions list checks and some of your other validations as well. And so, if you're looking at ROI, you might want to include in the penalties, civil and criminal penalties from, say, the OFAC validations. If you happen to, pay a vendor that when you first onboarded them, they weren't on on any of those lists, but subsequently were added to the list. Maybe they were added in between when you do your vendor master file cleanup and check them again. So you might be able to include the potential for, penalties in your ROI as well. So look at platforms that can consolidate your validations, either to do them easier on a recurring basis or to have them be done on a continuously monitoring basis, if I said that right. All right, so the next one, number 4, is how about tracking those confirmation calls? So if you do not have a way to track your confirmation calls, guess what? We all know, that when you initially call that vendor to verify their remittance change, and I do recommend you do it for both changes to the remittance address for check payment vendors, in addition to the ACH or wire payment bank change for your electronic payment vendors. That's because the fraudsters are after checks too, because check fraud has increased. So that increases the number of confirmation calls you have to make. And again, vendors don't always pick up the first time. So you have to keep contacting those vendors. And if you have a team member that's working on a vendor request, a change of remittance information, they've got to call the vendor. If they do not get the vendor when they call, let's say they're out the next day or on vacation, it has to be documented somewhere where they left off so whoever is coming in to replace them knows where to start. That confirmation log is what I call it. It is also a great way for management to see what is still pending, because you might have to, make some decisions based on the vendor, if they're a strategic vendor, if they have a large payment going out. Because if it is a valid request, you actually do not want the payment to go out, because it's going to come back and now you're going to have to deal with that rework. So you want to look at the outstanding vendors that have not confirmed the change request to see if there's anything else that may need to be done. Plus, it's a great way to track, because we all know what is tracked improves. And it could be, especially if you made the mistake I did and didn't make that confirmation call part of their productivity, it could be that the team members, they get frustrated trying to call these vendors and they don't answer. And so that's taken up their time, and they would much rather be productive with those things that you measure than the things that you don't. So make sure you're measuring them. Make sure you know how many are still pending, how long they have been pending, so you can make decisions about them, whether or not you're going to put them on payment hold or release the payment, or some other next step for those vendors that have not responded. All right. Then the last one you might not think about, and you may think it's more for, strictly on the AP side with invoices, but it can also be with vendor documents or vendor changes as well. And so it is the vendor welcome letter. So when you onboard a vendor, send them a welcome letter or email telling them how to do business with the accounts payable and vendor team. So, in addition to telling them where they need to send the invoice, also tell them what is required and where to send or submit changes to the vendor data. So, tell them that, right, a company branded ACH form for bank changes is required. Don't give it to them. Tell them that a vendor setup form, for example, if I didn't say this before, you can do it with vendor setup forms where you are asking for existing data in order to change data, like a remittance address. And that would not be on a company branded ACH form, it would be on a vendor setup form. So you can tell them what is required. So if they read it, and I know not all vendors are going to read it, they will then know who to contact when they have a change versus sending it to their internal team member and it sits on their desk for I don't know how long, or, they send it to the accounts payable team, which you should have like a separate email address for the vendor team versus the accounts payable team that deals with invoices. But maybe they send it there and it gets delayed. And so, giving the vendor the information up front where they need to send changes or who they need to contact for inquiries about vendor changes can help to speed up the change process. All right, so those are the five. I'm going to say them here again just briefly. One is to create substitute IRS forms. Two is to create a company branded ACH form. Three is to consolidate validations. Four is to track the confirmation calls. And five is to send a vendor welcome letter. All right, so thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 356th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.